Hello, all my Be in Demand listeners. This is your host, Laurie-Ann Murabito. If you are a coach, a consultant, or a service provider looking to get more visibility and really focus marketing on your business, well, public speaking is the answer. And that's what this podcast is all about. And today we are going to be talking about one of the limiting beliefs that I see over and over and over again. And that is, I don't have a great story. Nothing spectacular has ever happened to me. I've had an easy childhood, an easy life. I haven't overcome any major obstacles. That is just a belief that is holding you back. Maybe you're waiting for something spectacular to happen to you before you start speaking. Again, it's just a roadblock. It's just this wall. And I believe that walls are put there to see how badly you want what's on the other side. So a story doesn't have to be something major. There are pros and cons to all of that. A lot of times when we are hearing these inspiring speakers who tell these stories about how they had to cut a limb off, how they were born with no limbs, how they were on a plane that was hijacked, where other speakers are like, wow, nothing great like that has ever happened to me. Well, I'm sure for the person, it wasn't great. It wasn't something that they had asked for. And they are using it as their story. So there are different categories of speakers that have overcome some major adversity. There's a gentleman named Nick, and I believe he lives in Australia, and he was born with no limbs. And he tells a great, great story about how he was like, Mom, Dad, like, why was I born like this? And he has to be carried out onto the stage. And I have seen him speak, and he is very, very inspiring. During this presentation, where he talked about, like there he was, like speaking to this crowd, and this mom and dad brought their child who had the same birth defect as Nick. And Nick tells a story about how he looked down at this little boy and was like, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm like this, so that he doesn't feel alone. That's just one category of speakers. Other category of speakers are, have you become really successful? Is there something that you've done? This could be like Steve Jobs, Tony Robbins, Seth Godin. Another category is like fame. Past presidents, athletes like Tom Brady. The audience wants to learn how you think, what you had to believe in, and how you went from point A to point B. So essentially, we can break down these stories into, did you overcome something or did you accomplish something? What have you overcome and what have you accomplished? I know that you are starting to come up with stories. It's easier to think of, what have I overcome and what have I accomplished? What have I, not necessarily like, maybe I'm not going to use all of my stories, but more on that in a minute. If you're a coach, a consultant, there is something that you have overcome. There is something that you've accomplished. And that's why you're a coach or a consultant, because you help companies go from point A to point B. You help your clients go from point A to point B. But there's also two sides to every penny. And this is something that I learned in the leadership industry. I had a client and she was very confident. She had moved up in the corporation of Johnson & Johnson, and I will just never forget her talking about two sides to every penny, and that her confidence could inspire leadership, but it also turned people away. So there was the other side to the penny. And our stories are the same way. There are positives and negatives, meaning it will resonate or connect with some people that are in the audience, but it would also disconnect you from some people that are in the audience. So it's about you owning your story of what you overcame or what you accomplished. The best way to get repeat business is to be outstanding on the stage. Bottom line, nobody's going to refer a bad, boring speaker. But if you have a great story, you tell that story. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, air quotes, a great story. It's how you tell your story and a little bit more. There's also something about lessons. What are the lessons that the audience can take away? More on that in a minute. It's about how you make the audience feel. One of the things that I say to all of my clients and my students when you're crafting a speech is you set the goal of what do you want the audience to think differently, to feel differently, to do differently when they are done hearing you speak. So to be a great speaker, you have got to connect with the audience and inspire them to think, do, and feel something different. And being a great speaker is about honing your craft. I have told you many times the story about my very first presentation and how I just accidentally realized that speaking was a great form of marketing, but I wasn't very good. I have been honing my craft for years. I've done the reps and I keep getting better and better and better. And I just want to encourage you, no kid popped out of the womb with a microphone in their hand. It's a skill, just like riding a bike. So I'll share a little bit about some of my stories that I have told. In my leadership days, I told the story about when my dad was buying this jackknife and how this little girl was watching her dad. That was just a random story that has just stuck with me. And my dad still has this jackknife, so it's actually kind of a special story between me and my dad. I lived in Japan. I am 5'10" living in Japan, and I was 13 years old. I looked like a giant in Japan, and I was also bullied in the Catholic school that I had attended. And back then, the word bully wasn't being used. I called them not very nice. They were mean girls. That's all. And I didn't think anything of it, but when I look back, I was definitely bullied. And how did I overcome that? Well, there was some silver linings in it. And that's for another time, the lessons that I learned from that. I also lost my husband when I was 36 years old. My first husband passed away from cancer. That was something that I didn't know anybody who was a young widow. And I didn't want to talk about it because I felt like people would say, oh, poor Laurie-Ann. But there are lots of lessons from that time in my life. I also left my corporate job and this is how I fell into speaking. I just said yes to that very first event. Wasn't very good, but people coming up to me, how do you work with people? Do you have a website? Do you work with clients one-on-one? I mean, I just kind of found speaking, fell into it as like, wow, this is really great marketing. This is before I had a website. This is before social media. In order to get clients, you had to be in front of people. You had to go to networking events. That's all that was on my calendar when I left corporate, because I left corporate with no business plan and no sales skills. But I fell into speaking. So that's why I tell people as a speaking coach, I'm not just somebody who thinks speaking is a good idea. I've actually done this. And I actually went down the professional speaking route where I had to craft stories. I had to tell stories to inspire audiences. So I am just walking my talk. So I am sharing an accomplishment, but I'm also sharing something that I overcame. How do I get clients? How do I get in front of the right people? And trust me when I say I have made a lot of mistakes. I have made my fair share of mistakes in trying to grow a business, be self-employed, and even in the speaking world. So I want you to think about your story. What have you accomplished? What have you overcome? And what did you learn from it? Learning how to craft and tell a story is what entertains people. Story is candy for the brain. Our brains just love stories. I mean, look at TV. The reason why it's so entertaining, because it's a story. Whether you are watching the news or even if you are just watching some sort of a TV program, it's a story or a movie. Think about your favorite movies. They are telling a story. But a story is only entertaining if there are no lessons. As a speaker, we never want to take for granted that, oh, the audience will know exactly what I'm trying to teach them. No. What you do is you tell the audience what lesson to take away from this so that that lesson is what the audience remembers. And chances are it's also going to be in alignment with the reason why you're speaking. So I always want you to think about, what are the lessons that you want the audience to be walking away with? Always tell them. And if you're wondering, how do I tell these lessons? You can say something as simple as, what I want you to take away from this, what this means for you is. So think about statements like that. It's like a little segue from the story to the lesson, to the teaching, to the learning part of your speech. So here's what I want you to do next. I want you to pull out a piece of paper and make a list of stories. But you don't have to craft them. You don't have to make them into like these beautiful stories right now. Like, for example, I just told you about the jackknife story. I'm not going to tell you the jackknife story, but I would just write down the jackknife story when I was little with dad, living in Japan and being bullied, leaving my corporate job, first speaking event. Just make a list of these different stories that you have, because these are going to be different stories that you can pull out of your back pocket later on. But we're just making a list of stories. It doesn't mean that you're going to use them all. So after you make your list of stories, I want you to write next to each story, what lesson did you learn from this? What can other people learn from hearing your story? What are the key takeaways? Write some of those lessons down. So now you're taking that entertaining story and now we're turning it into something that will inspire and help the audience move forward. Now, when you think about the lessons that you are going to be sharing with the audience, what I want you to also think about is it should be in alignment with what you speak on. So if you speak on leadership, make sure your lessons are under the category of leadership. If you are speaking about marketing, about life coaching, about hypnosis, I speak about speaking and how it's a great form of marketing and visibility. So all of my everyday stories, things that I have overcome or accomplished, stories that I'm sharing that help with objections, they're all going to relate to my business. And I always want to tie it into why speaking is the fastest way to grow your business. I mean, that's my catchphrase. And having a catchphrase is something that you repeat over and over again. And it's almost like a little mini story. Speaking is the fastest way to grow your business. If I'm talking about growing your email list, I'm going to say speaking is the fastest way to grow your email. But there is also another episode where I talk about a catchphrase in a speaker breakthrough session, and that is episode 235. So be sure to go listen to that, where I help Susan Day. And what happened is that she came to the coaching session because it was really difficult for her to explain what she does. So I helped her come up with a catchphrase that she could use that was short, sweet, and concise. And that's what a catchphrase is designed to do, something that you can repeat over and over again. So be sure to check out that episode as well. So till next week, I want you to be in demand. Looking for some help with your speech or to break into the speaking world so that you can start using speeches, your signature speech, as your best form of marketing? Then I want to encourage you to book a call with me. We will talk about your business, your goals, and I will share with you the different ways that we can work together that are very short term, all the way to a little bit of long term. But I always want you to make the best choice for you and your business. It's a no pressure sales call, and that's speakandstandout.com/discovery. I can hardly wait to meet you.